Hi, Jen from Hamilton Lifecasting Studio again. We've just finished taking moulds of little Milla's hands and feet, and so now it's time for us to use step 2, casting stone. So we've finished our moulding process, so now we turn over the page to our step 2 casting. So again, we have a similar table as we had on the moulding page. It will tell you whether we're casting a mould for a baby, a child, an adult or a pet, and how many bags to use versus how much water to include. So in this case, we're filling the mould for a baby, so we're going to use 1 bag of the step 2 casting stone and 100 ml of water. So when making the mould, we used warm water. In this case, we're going to use cold water because it's not going to come into contact with baby's skin. And that's something very important, that plaster will heat upon setting, so we don't want plaster on baby's hands or feet. So I have poured my 100 ml of water, and use the spoons provided in your kit to mix the stone, because then you can throw them in the rubbish bin. We don't want to wash any of this down the sink, so we don't want to be using your good spoons at home that you'll be rinsing, because it can clog up your sink. So any leftover you have, put it in the rubbish bin. So this is our step 2 casting stone. We're going to sprinkle it over the top of our water. Now we provide enough material for you to cast babies. One of these will cast a baby up to about a year old. So in this case, because Milla's only 3 weeks old, we'll probably get 2 casts out of the 1 bag. So we just gently mix it until it's all smooth. We don't want to mix it too quickly because we don't want to introduce bubbles. So we're not baking a cake, we don't want it to be aerated. We want to keep bubbles out of it. And you can see the consistency is quite runny at this stage. Now, before we fill the mould, we want to tip it upside down and get out any water that might have pooled there, because the alginate will sweat. So you can see a little bit of water dripping out there. And we also want to get out any crumbs. So if you have crumbs that have fallen in, get your finger and wipe them away, or get a brush and brush them out. Likewise, if we have any of the skin around the outside, just the light skin of the moulding material, we want to kind of pluck that off, because that can fall into the mould and that will affect some of the detail. So if there's anything that's loose and hanging that shouldn't be there, let's just take it off. Cool. So in this case, I can see in the mould, little Milla has closed his fist. So a closed fist can be nice and easy to fill, because the plastering material will come in and fill the whole space. Where we can run into troubles is if the hand is partially open or we have a finger sticking out. What's going to happen is air in the mould will rise to the highest point. If the highest point is the fingers, you're going to get air trapped in there, and that will mean that when you take the cast out of the mould, you'll have missing fingers, and we don't want to do that. So I'm going to show you how to avoid missing fingertips. So if we think like an air bubble, we need to pour the plaster into the mould and then tip it back so that the plaster can run down into the fingertips. So I'll show you how we do that. So now that I've got a nice thin mix, I'm going to pour a little bit into my mould. I'm going to give it a good tap. Put your hand on the top if you don't want it to splat anywhere. I'm going to tap it and roll it. That will make sure it fills any cavities. And now I'm going to hold the mould there so it doesn't come out of my cup. So these fingers are coming down and around this way. So the front of his hand is in this position here. So that's where I want my plaster to come down and around into his upturned fingers. So I'm going to tap it as I tip it back into the cup. And I'm going to do this several times. And you can see in there how the plaster is now sitting inside of the fingers. So I'll continue to do that a few more times. Now I'm not worried about my bench, because my bench, as you can see, is covered in muck, but you might want to put down a paper towel. And the last time I tip it, I will hold it at this angle, and I'm not going to tip it upright, because if I have done all of this work and then I tip it upright and fill it, I've just undone all of my good work. So I don't want to undo what I've put into those fingertips, so I'm going to leave it at this tilted angle, because now I know the fingertips are filled, and I'm going to only tip it back a little bit at a time as the mould fills up. So I won't stand it up straight until it's totally full. So now that's full, I can put it on the bench and leave it there. In this case, the front of his wrist is there, so I'm going to actually tilt it on an angle. I'm going to put a little something underneath it actually, because I want the bottom of the wrist to be angled off. Right, and now you can see I've still actually got quite a bit of plaster left, so I'm going to use that to fill one of our feet moulds. So in this case, you can see some water has pooled in the bottom of this, so I want to get that water out, and I want to check that there's no crumbs that have fallen in there. Take away any of the loose skin that's hanging around the top. We don't need any of that, because we don't want to risk it falling in and affecting our mould. All right. Now feet are much easier, because we're not going to have upturned toes unless they've really flexed their foot back, but in this case I can see little Miller's toes and it's just a nice even foot. So his heel's there, his toes are down there. So I'm going to start by filling the heel of the foot first, so I'm tilting the cast backwards. So I've just filled the heel, the toes are up here, so now I tap it as I tilt it down to the toes. So my toes are at the bottom of the mould here. I don't want that falling out, but I'm just tilt it so it doesn't come out, and give it a nice good tap. Don't be afraid to get rough with it. That will just encourage the air bubbles that are sitting in the toes to come up and rise out the open cavity here. Now we don't need to be doing the filling and tipping like we did with the hand, because we know that those toes are straight down, so they will be filled. Again though, I'm not going to put it back like this and fill it, because then I've just taken all of the plaster back out of the toes. So I'm going to leave it at that angle and continue filling it at that angle, only tipping it back as it gets filled to the top. Now we need to leave these for at least 2 hours before we demold them. You can leave them overnight, but don't leave them any longer than 24 hours, because the alginate will sweat and will create water content in there, and that can weaken the cast. So make sure that you get them out within about 12 hours max.